Players are quitting Yu-Gi-Oh every day, but is quitting the game really the answer to all problems? Especially the COVID era changed a lot for the game and made veterans like Thomas Rose, Din Kang Farm and many more rethink their passion. From more hand traps than I can count to a vanishing old school character in collecting. But when did this change start? And is today's Yu-Gi-Oh doomed to die out to its competition? That Konami is making good movement now, finally.
It's for the YCS in Tokyo, I believe. The top 32 is going to get stamped ones.
It's crazy how Yu-Gi-Oh needed so much time to do this, even though it's so obvious.
This was the era where Konami would go in and out of this really healthy, but then just tip over the edge and then become too powerful.
It's easier, of course, to join Lorcana or One Piece. But I know some big Yu-Gi-Oh players that are big into Flesh and Blood now.
I did see some success right when I came back in 2022. But then, like, shortly after that, a Shizu tier limit came out, and then I was like, yeah, I'm done with this game again. I'm not playing that format.
Hey Academy, my name is Alex, and this is the Fabled Academy podcast, where I talk to the best players and competitive personalities in the realm of TCGs. You are listening to the 18th episode, where my guest is YCS champion and YouTuber Marcus Hayden. We talk about why we both quit Yu-Gi-Oh! But found passion again. Hey Marcus, welcome to the Fabled Academy.
Yeah, thanks for having me, man. Glad to be here, Alex.
Yeah, we are actually meeting the first time today. That's crazy for me, and I'm super excited to talk to you all about Yu-Gi-Oh! But also TCGs in general.
Heck yeah. No, I'm super excited too. I love the content you put out.
Man, thanks so much. I was really happy when I messaged you and you said you know some of my videos, because I was enjoying your videos as well.
Dang. That makes me really happy, dude. I just started doing the YouTube stuff because I absolutely love this game and it's like a passion of mine. So it makes me happy that other people get enjoyment out of it. I just put out the content that I would want to see.
When it comes to your YouTube channel, there is a direction you are focusing on, not only at Yu-Gi-Oh, but on a specific part of Yu-Gi-Oh. What exact time is your favorite time in Yu-Gi-Oh, and why do you cover it on your channel?
Yeah, so I guess initially I just wanted to broadly do retro Yu-Gi-Oh, because I just love Yu-Gi-Oh from 2010 to 2017 era, because that's kind of like when I played, right? So I probably just have an affinity because of that. But specifically right now, the format I'm really pushing is REDU format, which is September 2012. It was right after Windups, Inzectors, Dino Rabbit, Chaos Dragons all got hit in some ways, which just kind of brought them back down to earth and the same power level as like previously good decks. And so that's the format. And it's been like popping off our Discord. We made it like 3 weeks ago and we have 600 people in there now. Our locals are getting like 30 some odd people online. So definitely a bigger boom than I expected. I just made the video because I love the format, and now I'm still making content because other people are receiving it pretty well. But outside of that, I do that as well as some Edison format content because that's like the most competitive way to play retro at the moment.
Also, the note for the viewers here, because I think it's really interesting to talk from our both perspectives here, because I'm coming from Germany and I think you're coming from the US. It's also a different standpoint, right? Where you can talk us through here in the podcast and maybe share some of your experiences that then in retrospect, of course, also talking about these older formats are very in contrast to what I experienced here in Germany, because I was also active during the time that you played in the modern era of TCG, right? The 2016 to 2019 era. That was the era where I really were discovering the local tournaments, YCSs in Europe as well. And so I'm really curious on your experiences just in general. And also, if I remember right, you also had some wily success in Yu-Gi-Oh! In those days as well, right?
I would say around the time that you're expressing, like 2016 onwards, is when I started also really getting competitive in Yu-Gi-Oh! It was more than just like locally or regionally. I started like attending YCSs and nationals and stuff like that at this point in time. So yeah, I guess I'll just start from there. In 2016, I had won my first YCS at YCS Minneapolis, and it was with Pendulums, it was with Metafoes specifically, Metal Foes. That's why my channel name is Metafoes. But so I won at the end of 2016, and then in 2017 is when the Zodiac cards came out, and I saw a lot of success then as well. I won an ARG, I topped 16 nationals, had another YCS top, a couple other Alter Reality Games tops, which I know is like the equivalent to like the CCG ones, right? That you guys have out in Europe, kind of.
Yeah.
Or they're like moderate. They're not YCS big, right? But yeah, so then in 2017, I saw a lot of success in that way. I had a couple YCS tops in 2018 as well. And then I started getting out of the game in 2019, and then COVID happened, and I was pretty much completely out of the game at that point.
You were coming back at one point after COVID as well, trying out what YuGiOh did after we had that COVID era, but you weren't really that happy anymore with the modern game, I assume, as in comparison to what you experienced before COVID.
Yeah, no, that's correct. I'd say like I started having one foot out the door, I'd say sometime in 2018 when like Goki combo became a thing, because it just wasn't fun to play against someone that, like, I know this is going to sound very arrogant, but that I knew I was far more capable then and would still lose because they were just doing these YouTube combo boards where they'd rip 4 out of my hand and have negates, and it was like, it didn't matter how good of a player I was. And that kind of continued through 2019 with like Thunder Dragon Orcus having 7 interruptions with their end board and a floodgate. And then I was like, all right, that, you know, I'm done. COVID happened. I came back. It was a little bit more interactive, but it was still very like your win rate going second's just like substantially lower, I guess, in these newer formats that versus a retro format. I did see some success right when I came back in 2022. It was YCS Minneapolis, and I got 3rd place playing Runic Sprite. And the reason I played Runic Sprite is because it like specialized in forcing the game to be complex, and it was a lot better at going second because all your cards were like board breaking cards that, you know, if you had the field spell up would have net you some more advantage and whatnot. But then like shortly after that, a Shizu tier limit came out, and then I was like, yeah, I'm done with this game again. I'm not playing that format. But yeah, and then since then, I like mildly check back into the game sometimes. I don't play, but like I'll watch YouTube videos and stuff. And so I guess currently it's in a better place, but just the power creep of Yu-Gi-Oh! In general has just been really, really, I don't want to say bad because some people enjoy that style of gameplay, but it's just a different game. It's not Yu-Gi-Oh! As I remember it, if that makes sense.
Yeah. Yeah, I can definitely understand your point here and feel it kind of the same way, even though I was never playing on a level that you did. But I feel Yu-Gi-Oh! In general has just changed over the years, and that's okay. Just for the change, also for all the players that enjoy the style that Yu-Gi-Oh! Is today. But I think players like yourself and me that enjoyed another side of Yu-Gi-Oh!, how it was before those days, we never really find in Yu-Gi-Oh! What we found in those years back. Maybe even in the times where we were much younger, not playing competitively. And I also want to touch on that here with you as well, because I want to really know who you are and why you even started to play Yu-Gi-Oh! In the first place.
Yeah, no, that's a good question. I guess if my intro to Yu-Gi-Oh! Would be, I remember my older brother and older cousin getting structure decks. Like, I think it was like Joey and Yugi maybe, or Joey and Pegasus. And they were playing in our basement on top of a moving bin. And I was just like, oh, these cards are so cool. And then they got really into the anime, so I got really into it. And at this point in time, I'm really young because just for reference, I was born in 1998. So this was probably like 2003 or something when they're getting into it. So I'm a little kid, like 4 or 5 years old. I was really into it, but it kind of tapered off. Like they were into it, but then they were also into Pokemon and all these other things. So it wasn't until I was like 7 or 8 where I like started getting cards for Christmas or whatever, Yu-Gi-Oh! Cards. And I thought it was cool. I started doing duels with like my cousins, my brothers, maybe some like neighborhood friends. And we do 6-way duels, and we didn't actually know the rules. If you had a Dark Magician, you're just slamming it. You're not tribute summoning. And yeah, like MST obviously negated back then. But yeah, so that's how we played. And it was all like fun. And I guess just like backdoor Yu-Gi-Oh! You'd call it. I don't know. It wasn't like true to the rules. It was more like anime Yu-Gi-Oh! And then I get completely out of the game when I start middle school because, I think I'm too cool for it at this point. But then I moved to a different state about 8 hours away in year 7, so 7th grade. And when I moved, I didn't have very many friends, didn't really have any social outlets other than playing video games online with my friends that lived in the Chicagoland area where I previously lived. So I remember going to the mall one day with my older brother, Tom, and for reference, he's 5 years older than I am. So I'm 12 at this point. He's like 17, and we come across a card shop. We go in there, and there's a local tournament happening for Yu-Gi-Oh! And we're like just reminiscing, oh, we could beat all these guys, blah, 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 And so the next week, my brother and I go back. He brings his elemental hero deck. I bring my machine deck, which is just like a hodgepodge of tackle footballer and like maybe 2 gadgets and like just random stuff I put together. So we're at this card shop and he plays this guy named Mark. And this is mid 2011 at this point. And he sits down to play Mark, and this guy just absolutely scrapes my brother over and over and over. And this is my older brother. He was the best player, you know, when I was a kid with all of us. And I'm like, oh my God, this guy is just destroying him. And this guy switches from his like actual meta deck, like agents or something, to like fortune ladies to give my brother a chance. And he continues to scrape my brother with this bad deck. And I was like, all right, there's no way. And I'm so competitive. We go home. My brother wants to quit. This is dumb. I don't know why we ever try to get back into this game. But I just go down the YouTube rabbit hole because I don't like I said, I moved to a new state. I don't really have friends. And I guess my competitive nature just kicked in. So I just start watching nonstop YouTube videos. I'm upgrading my deck as much as I can with my bulk. So I'm putting like Cyber Dragon in my machine deck. I'm putting 2 of each gadgets because I just had common gadgets at the time. And yeah, so I go to my first local. I get absolutely scraped. Pisses me off even more. I start researching more. I'm asking, like, I think my birthday or I don't know, something's coming up. I'm asking my parents to like buy certain cards on eBay if they can. And so slowly I start making an X-Saber deck. And at this point, X-Sabers aren't really good in like later 2011 because we're starting Tengu format now. But that's when I get into the game and I win my first locals with X-Sabers. And I guess that was like my intro, and it didn't get really competitive. It was always local or just regional until about, I'd say 2015 nationals is when I was like starting to want to attend YCSs and stuff like that. Cause I got my invite in 2015 and that's also my first top was 2015 nationals. I topped with Burning Abyss, top 16 for the United States or North America. But yeah, that's my intro. Is a combination of moving out of state, a nostalgia, and just being competitive. I don't know what it was when I watched my older brother just get destroyed, but it lit a fire in me, I guess.
I think what you're describing is what a lot of the competitive Yu-Gi-Oh players from that era experienced, with competitiveness, meeting new people, going to tournaments, going actually out from that like kitchen table TCG or backyard TCG style of Yu-Gi-Oh! And then experiencing, okay, there are rules, there are different cards, there are combos, there are even deck archetypes and stuff like that that can work together. There's a meta going on. There's so much stuff to dive into. And that's, I think, what keeps the blood flowing for those competitive Yu-Gi-Oh! Players, not only from back then, but also today, when they can just dive into the world and spend so much time into it and getting better at the game, actually competing with other people in real life. I also think it is pretty important for me here to tell a little bit on my story as well, because the time that you actually gone to your first locals, I have never actually visited a local in my life, but I was playing Yu-Gi-Oh! Again as well. I experienced something similar to you, where basically I was picking up my first starter decks, also with Joey and Pegasus, funnily, in 2003. I got some LOB packs in 2002 as well, but I couldn't really build a deck around that. But I think Yu-Gi-Oh! In comparison to Pokemon back then, for me was much more interesting because you could actually play a game with them, even though you could also play with the Pokemon cards, right? But no one did that actually. Everyone was just flexing with their like holo cards, and if you didn't really have holo cards, you weren't really in the gang. So with Yu-Gi-Oh! It was a little bit different. There was actually a skill component to it, I think. And also it was a connection that you can make when you were going to another city or you were visiting some friends of your parents, because if they had kids and they also played Yu-Gi-Oh! You could just connect right away and say, hey, yeah, I have also a Yu-Gi-Oh! Deck. And that's why I basically brought my Yu-Gi-Oh! Deck everywhere with me, even though I had not a real deck, but it was fun all nonetheless. And it was the same experience then coming into like 7th grade, 6th grade, 7th grade, where I was like, okay, I have other interests now. I just put my cards into this closet. And right around 2012 for me as well, a friend of mine actually that is still with me today, one of my best friends, we talked about it and we were like, okay, you really love Yu-Gi-Oh! As well. Maybe we could jam some games with these old school cards. And in 2012, we were just playing old school Yu-Gi-Oh! Like we did in the school. but buying some cards on eBay, just like random cards. For example, if you imagine us playing Goat, and then randomly we are inserting like one card that is in the era of 2012 somewhere. There's a card called like Chainsaw Insect that is a 4-star. And he was just, okay, I need to get off your Jinzo and I need that Chainsaw Insect for that. And it's like some crazy things like that. But we were talking about that imagination of going to a real tournament at that point. So it was starting to get in our imagination that someday we need to try and go to a tournament. We didn't really knew that there was a meta or different decks or stuff like that, but it was a first thought about it. And actually in 2016 was the first time when I went to my first locals, and I also met like real Yu-Gi-Oh players like yourself that are playing in the rule set, trying to figure out the decks for the next format, and also traveling to those YCSs. And I think for me that was really a turning point, because I was more of a collector in Yu-Gi-Oh compared to a competitive player. But for me that was the opportunity to get to know that big community in Yu-Gi-Oh. And around that time, as you told already, like Burning Abyss, for example, was a big thing for a long time actually. And I was following around all these different players that are coming up with these creative solutions, specifically in Burning Abyss as well. And I thought, man, this is such a beauty, not only like collecting these cards, but being creative in a way with deck building and stuff like that. And I'm really curious on your thoughts here on this era as well, because I feel like 2016 to 2019 as well is an era for a lot of players that basically with COVID shut down, because I don't really know from a player standpoint specifically, but there is a magic to this era where I even hear some players talking about this specific era being maybe an old school format era in the future as well, or even being played today with stuff like Zodiac Mirrors or Burning Abyss.
Yeah, no, definitely. I love specifically, I really enjoy, if you take away Pepe format, I really enjoy 2016 and 2017 Yu-Gi-Oh! I feel like the 2016 to 2019 era, there's a lot of good formats. Like I really enjoy Nationals format, Zoo Mirrors. I really enjoyed like the Metafo, ABC, Mermail, Inov format, I think it's called. I really enjoy that. That was early 2017, late 2016. I really enjoy like the Pendulum True Draco format that preceded Zoo format, right? Like I enjoyed a lot of formats in that era, even into 2018. I really like the Salomon Great Striker format. Like before the boards got crazy, it was like Salomon Greats just it was more advantage based than it was like preventing your opponent from playing based. So yeah, I enjoy all those formats. The issue with that era too is I feel like every year has like blips of really bad like super combo decks that exist, right? Like in 2016 was Pepe, in 2017 was Full Power Spirals, in 2018 was Goki, in 2019 was the Thunder Dragon Orcus deck, right? Every deck has a deck that's like trying to do something really unfair, and I feel this was the era where Konami would kind of go in and out of this like really healthy, where every deck feels strong, there's so much room to outplay your opponent, but then it was like just tip over the edge and then become too powerful because of generic negates or like hand ripping and stuff like that. And it was in constant flux. But yeah, I really enjoyed a lot of those formats. It was just like, I think it's when I started to realize at the same time that power creep could become a huge issue for Yu-Gi-Oh! I think at some point, and it was really 2018, 2019, when decks weren't really playing trap cards anymore. That's when I was like, all right, we're taking out like a whole concept of this game that was created to make it more interactive because it's too slow. And in today's meta, I don't keep up as much, but when I look at deck lists, you very rarely see more than 1 to 3 traps in a deck. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
I think that's my issue with current format. But 2016 to 2019, I think is a mixed bag of really good formats and then some bad formats. But I enjoyed it still. That's why I was still playing the game, still traveling. And arguably 2016, 2017 was like my best 2 years as a player. So what are your thoughts? Because I know you're saying you got in 2016, but you also left in 2019. Is it only because of COVID, or did you have it take any issues with the game itself?
Hey Academy, want even more content or a way to support the channel? Check out the YouTube memberships and Patreon. Links in the description. There are 3 different levels to choose from with different benefits. And even a special offer for the team level on Patreon. Thank you so much for your support, and now back to the podcast. Yeah, I was basically in 2019 leaving the game of multiple of reasons. I think actually for me, it was a time, I'm a little bit older than you. I'm born in 93.
Okay.
And so it was a time in my life where I had to decide really, do I want to move on traveling to these Yu-Gi-Oh events, collecting all of these cards? Because I was also like investing heavily in my collection. Like basically every penny that I have left, I was putting into my collection. And so I needed to think about it. And I was like, okay, maybe I should get a little bit around in my life and focus a little bit more on like other stuff. I decided, okay, you know what? I really enjoyed this time in my life, but I need to get my head around on different sides. Also because I was going through a breakup at that time, and I was thinking about switching jobs for the first time after my studies. Mm-hmm. I was working for around 3 years at that time in my first full-time job. And I also had a small business where I was doing like image videos and photography gigs. That was basically a mix of different things, even though I loved and enjoyed the side of Yu-Gi-Oh! Very much. And I also came back to it in 2020 when basically we couldn't go to tournaments, but like this whole shebang happened where cards got crazy expensive. And I was like, oh my God, like, why didn't I buy more cards? Like it was crazy a little bit. But for me, really 2019, the last event actually where I've gone was like that YCS where the Emperor Dragon was given out here in Europe. I think it was Utrecht, the YCS, the 200th YCS, I think it was around that time. So it was a very magical experience, I think, going to an event like that where also a prize card was given out that was so deeply connected to my childhood memories with Chaos Emperor Dragon from Invasion of Chaos, and Konami basically giving us like that nostalgia prize card. I think just from an outstand view, not being a player ever capable of winning a prize card like that, I thought that was a really nice way of ending that year for me. But I also had that experience when I discovered Yu-Gi-Oh! Again, that things have changed really, and that I didn't really want to keep up with it anymore. But I tried in 2020 when that whole boom happened. And in 21, I decided, okay, you know what? It's time for me to go on. I don't really want to be invested in that like financial aspect of the hobby. I want to get out of that, and I want to enjoy like going to tournaments again when the time comes. And that was really when I discovered like Flesh and Blood, and later on also other TCGs that I cover on my channel as well.
Heck yeah. Okay. No, that's interesting. It's funny that you bring up that you got back into it in 2020, because what I remember in 2020 or 2021 looking up card prices of cards I've sold, and it just made me sick because everything was so much more expensive than I had ever like sold cards for. I used to have a Max Rarity Goat deck in 2014 that I sold in like maybe 2015 or 16 for a couple $100. And then when I went back and looked at all the card prices, it would have been like $8,000 or something like that.
Yeah.
So it's just foul. It's funny though. But yeah, so you get into other card games. You specifically mentioned Flesh and Blood. That's probably the one I'm least familiar with. Can you tell me a little bit about it?
Oh yeah, sure. I also think Flesh and Blood, talking to you specifically, being active in the 2012 ongoing era, I think Flesh and Blood is, just from the interactive standpoint, very similar to what we experienced in those eras in Yu-Gi-Oh! Games are typically much longer and much more interactive in the regards that both players have a real standpoint in the game, so it feels like you can do something even though you are facing a deck that is inherently better than yours, even though there are outliers in Flesh and Blood as well that are super powerful that we had. But Flesh and Blood is basically a fighting game from a perspective that you're choosing a hero, you and your opponent, and you're fighting to the death. So that also means that you are starting at your biggest strength at the beginning of the game, and then you're wearing down because there is armor that you are blocking with. Obviously, you're going through your deck. And in Flesh and Blood, it's very interesting because there are a lot of games where you actually are going through your whole deck. So you can kind of, I know in Yu-Gi-Oh! These like search effects and these draw effects are really important. But in Flesh and Blood, even though we had some crazy draw cards, it's much more important that you count on every card that you have in your deck, and also that you plan on how you want to pitch those. Because in Flesh and Blood, it's actually a resource system that you need to take a card from your hand, or you need to have an equipment to pay for the cost of a card that you want to play out. And that means that the card that you're pitching is going back into your deck. And that way you can also craft certain hands that you will draw during the later period of the game.
Interesting. Yeah, no, it's definitely interesting. I know the big benefit to Flesh and Blood that I do know about is the pricing in comparison to what we face here in Yu-Gi-Oh! And I feel like all the new card games are kind of at the top of that when it comes to pricing.
Yeah, definitely. That's something that when I'm coming back to leaving Yu-Gi-Oh! In 2019 and coming back in 2020 and 2021, that was like, of course, for every TCG, right? You couldn't really go out to tournaments, you couldn't play. But that also meant that players were viewing the hobby from a vastly different standpoint, even though there were people like me collecting or investing in TCGs forever. But it was a time where really I thought, okay, Yu-Gi-Oh! Is feeling a lot more than Pokemon to me, because it's not so much anymore about like meeting people and playing with them or talking about passion, but rather, okay, who has the most cards that are the most valuable, or who has that one card that is like going up in price crazy.
Right.
And there was like much more what I experienced in Pokemon. And so I thought, okay, I really want to get back into that community much more, meeting people and playing the game, or at least getting to know the community that is playing the game. And then I discovered that there are also like some aspects to the game of Yu-Gi-Oh! That are not like it was anymore. And so I think people are naturally drawn to other TCGs in these days because you just want to see something fresh, or you want to feel the same way you played your old TCG back before COVID.
Mm-hmm. No, that's fair. I would say that in terms of like the newer TCGs that are out now, the one that interests me the most, and it's probably like similar to Yu-Gi-Oh, right, is One Piece. And it's because I have this deep love for One Piece as an anime, so it would make it easier to connect to the game itself, if that makes sense. Like here, I mean, I don't know if you can see it, but I got a Luffy tattoo on my arm.
Oh yeah, nice.
And then I'm literally wearing a One Piece shirt right now. So yeah, funnily enough, that alongside the pricing, I have so many friends who try to get me into that game. But my issue is I've played a lot of other games in the past. Some of them are like more deck building games, like DC Deck Builder, Marvel Legendary. I've played Pokemon, I've played Magic, stuff like that. And every other game, I don't like there's two big issues. The resource systems that games have, and then being able to play on both players' turns are some of the big issues I have. I've even played like Runeterra and Hearthstone and stuff like that too. That's my big gripe with a lot of card games that aren't Yu-Gi-Oh! Is you don't have... Yu-Gi-Oh's the most free-flowing card game, right? There's the least amount of restrictions to like actually play the game itself. And then I also like that theoretically you're supposed to be able to play on every player's turn. I feel like it's become less and less of that, but that's why I have such an affinity for older Yu-Gi-Oh! and do the retro content and whatnot. But my fear with like Flesh and Blood and Lorcana, I guess, is I just don't have... Like, I would be starting from the ground level. I don't know anything about those games, really. I don't know a whole lot about Disney. I don't know a whole lot about like Flesh and Blood's like background. So for me to play one of those games, I feel like it would take a community of friends that I'm already involved with to want to also play those games.
Yeah. I also feel like that specific point that you're touching on is the biggest point in holding like some games getting bigger as compared to One Piece, because basically when you're playing Yu-Gi-Oh! And you described it very well, it's most likely that you also enjoy the anime of One Piece, right? Or you have at least the friend group that played Yu-Gi-Oh! That is now trying to get into One Piece together. And on the other hand, with Flesh and Blood, for example, there was a big time, and there are still players coming over from Magic the Gathering, because there is a bigger connection between these two games at the surface, at least. There's also a lot of like similarities and connections in Yu-Gi-Oh! And Flesh and Blood, but they are not as obvious in the first place. Also because the background of Flesh and Blood, the company that is producing it, was involved like in all of the different TCGs back then, with Magic the Gathering as well as Yu-Gi-Oh! In New Zealand. And so it's very interesting to see the different types of people, also the different types of age groups that are mostly drawn to different card games that are popping up today. Not saying that players from your age or my age are not playing Flesh and Blood, but rather playing One Piece. But I think it's a bigger group of people from the Yu-Gi-Oh! Community just wanting to try out One Piece compared to Flesh and Blood. Also because, of course, in Flesh and Blood, there's not really a big IP behind that. They're basically building the world themselves.
Yep. From the ground up.
Yeah, it's easier, of course, to join Lorcana or One Piece, I think, just from the story background.
No, definitely their IPs are much bigger. It's also like interesting that post-COVID, I feel like so many other card games kind of started picking up outside of your traditional Yu-Gi-Oh! Magic, Pokemon. Because the only other card game that was before COVID that like kind of had a big spark was the Dragon Ball Super card game, but I feel like that's kind of died since. And that was my fear too about switching card games is what if I switch, invest all this time trying to get better, and then this card game kind of just falls off. So I think the other thing is I wanted to, before I like try out some of these other games, is to see how they establish themselves, if they end up suffering from power creep. Because I don't know these companies, and I don't know if they'll last. Because Dragon Ball's got a big IP too, you know what I mean? And I don't know anyone who's still playing Dragon Ball Super. Whereas like locally, when it came out, a bunch of my friends played. So
it's, I think, a good example that you're bringing up with Dragon Ball Super, because I think there is like this time frame that players need to watch a game grow and then decide if they want to join it. But I think with all of these new games, like Flesh and Blood, I think is the oldest, so to say, of the newer games, because it's like now going into the 6th year. And One Piece, of course, and Lorcana as well. Star Wars Unlimited for sure. Yeah, much younger, and they need to prove a little bit more, I think. Even though I think Flesh and Blood has a hard time proving as well, because it's the one that has the least IP to it. But for Flesh and Blood in general, it's a really good game. If you want to try out and you have a local game group, it's worth trying it out. Also, I can understand all the players that are like, okay, you know what? All my friends are playing One Piece. I'm not playing Flesh and Blood on my own. That's like understandable, of course. But I know some big Yu-Gi-Oh! Players as well that are big into Flesh and Blood now. And I'm 2 days after we have this podcast, I'm in recording with one of them. Lucas Oswald is his name. He was the national champion, the Dragon Duel national champion in 2019 in Yu-Gi-Oh! From North America. And he is a big Flesh and Blood player nowadays. And he's also talking about why he really thinks Flesh and Blood is his game today compared to Yu-Gi-Oh! Also, of course, because of the lifestyle, and also because of like how the companies treat the game differently. And I think there are pros and cons to both sides, right? You were just talking to me before we started recording that Konami is making good movement now, finally. And introducing a prize card system that has like these ash blossoms, these stamped ash blossoms for top 32. Or Effect Veiler, yeah.
Hopefully the Ash Blossom eventually, that'd be even bigger, but yeah.
Yeah.
It's for the YCS in Tokyo, I believe. The top 32 is going to get stamped ones, which is, I was on Team APS's channel a couple of weeks back, and we were talking about prizing in Yu-Gi-Oh! And how like a big step they could take would be doing stamped cards for all of Top Cut that are like cards people would actually play rather than exclusive cards. Because if you take, like the issue is, Yu-Gi-Oh! Does a first place vanilla prize card. No one's ever going to play it. No, it's not really sought after. But then if you do a really good card, like back in the day when they have a crush card virus, right? Now that person who wins the event has a significant advantage over anyone else who enters the tournament. So the middle point is doing cards that everyone has access to, but is a special card, right? So that's why it's really cool that they're targeting like Effect Veiler, because it's a card a lot of decks play, but it's stamped. It's going to be one of 32. There's not going to be more of them. So yeah, I think that's something. Don't other card games like I don't know about Flesh and Blood, but I'm pretty sure like Lorcana and One Piece kind of do that, where they have special versions of cards as prize cards that are stamped, and brings up the value of, I mean, just your prize in general for doing well at a tournament.
Yeah, definitely. It's something that a lot of players have asked for. I also had Thomas Rose on my podcast a short time ago, where he also was talking about the stamp cards. Yeah, it's crazy how Yu-Gi-Oh! Needed so much time to do this, even though it's so obvious. That's a wrap for today's podcast. Though it's just the beginning of the conversation with Marcus. In the next episode, Marcus and I dive into the low-hanging fruits of Yu-Gi-Oh! That are being picked up by other games. Price support, game mechanics, and collectability are all factors that are being enhanced by new TCGs and makes players switch sides. The episode comes out 3 days after this podcast, so either subscribe to get notified or click here to watch it.